The entire Punic Wars from 264 to 146 BCE were a century-long struggle between two of the ancient Mediterranean's greatest powers, Rome and Carthage. Across three devastating conflicts, these civilizations clashed over territory, trade, and supremacy. From the naval battles of the First Punic War to Hannibal's daring invasion of Italy in the Second, and the destruction of Carthage in the Third, the wars reshaped the political, economic, and military landscape of the Mediterranean. By the end, Rome emerged as the unchallenged hegemon of the Western Mediterranean, while Carthage was erased from the map, leaving a legacy of ambition, strategy, and the high cost of empire. Long before the first triremes clashed in Sicilian waters, two civilizations grew apart yet were bound by the same sea. The Mediterranean, calm and radiant beneath the sun, was a highway of trade, ambition, and conquest. Upon its northern and southern shores, two peoples, one Latin, one Phoenician, built empires that would one day meet in ruinous war. Carthage traced its origins to Tyre, a city of traders on the coast of Phoenicia in what is now Lebanon. Around the 9th century BCE, settlers under Queen Dido, as Roman legend later called her, crossed the sea and founded a colony on the coast of North Africa. The city rose where the winds met the currents, its position chosen for commerce, not conquest. From its twin harbors, one circular, one rectangular, Carthage's merchants spread out across the western Mediterranean. By the 7th century BCE, it had eclipsed its mother city in wealth and influence. The purple dye of Tyre gave way to the silver of Spain, the grain of Sicily, and the ivory of Africa. Carthaginian ships dotted the horizon from Sardinia to Gibraltar. Its sailors knew the coasts of Iberia and Gaul. Some even ventured beyond the Pillars of Heracles into the Atlantic. Politically, Carthage was ruled not by kings, but by a complex oligarchy. Two Sophites, judges, served as chief magistrates, assisted by a council of elders and a powerful senate drawn from the city's aristocratic families. At its heart stood commerce. Every expedition, every colony, every alliance was measured by profit. Yet beneath this merchant's calm was an iron will. Carthage could raise vast mercenary armies. Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, Gauls, and Greek adventurers, led by Carthaginian officers. Their generals were skilled and their navy unmatched. By the 6th century BCE, Carthage was not only a trading giant, but also a military power protecting its routes from the Greeks of Syracuse and the expanding interests of Etruria and Rome. Across the sea, Rome was rising by different means. Founded, as tradition held, in 753 BCE, it had endured the rule of kings before expelling them in 509 BCE to become a republic. In the centuries that followed, Rome grew through discipline and relentless expansion. It conquered the Latin cities of the surrounding plains, subdued the Etruscans to the north and the Samnites to the south, and by 270 BCE had brought all of Italy under its control. Unlike Carthage, Rome's power was rooted in its citizens. Every landowner could be called to serve. Every soldier fought for the republic that gave him a stake in its destiny. Its political structure was austere yet adaptable. Two consuls commanded its armies, elected yearly by citizens who gathered in the assemblies. The Senate guided policy, an elite body whose authority rested on experience and lineage. To Rome, honor and survival were one. Every war it fought was justified as defensive, and every treaty broken explained as a necessary preemption. Its armies were disciplined, its legions flexible, its logistics unmatched. But it lacked one thing: experience at sea. By the early 3rd century BCE, the Mediterranean's balance of power rested upon three poles: Carthage, Rome, and the Hellenistic kingdoms to the east. Carthage ruled the waves and much of North Africa, including its colonies in modern Tunisia, parts of Algeria, and Libya. It controlled western Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and southern Spain through alliances and tribute. Rome, meanwhile, commanded the Italian peninsula, with influence stretching to the Adriatic and beyond. The two powers coexisted uneasily, bound by treaties yet divided by suspicion. The treaties of 509 BCE, renewed in 348 and 306 BCE, delineated spheres of influence. Carthage dominated the seas and islands, while Rome confined itself to Italy. But such boundaries were fragile, drawn upon an ever-shifting map of ambition. Between them lay Sicily, the jewel of the Mediterranean. Fertile, rich, and strategically placed, it was the crossroad of trade routes linking Africa, Italy, and Greece. To the west stood Carthaginian strongholds, Lilybaeum, Panormus, and Motia. To the east rose the Greek city of Syracuse, ancient and powerful. For centuries, Sicily had been a battleground between Greeks and Carthaginians, its fields watered with blood. Yet by the mid-3rd century BCE, both sides faced a new force pressing at the edges, the Romans. In 289 BCE, the city of Messana on Sicily's northeastern tip fell into turmoil. A group of mercenaries called the Mamertines seized it, slaughtering its men and taking the city for themselves. Caught between the ambitions of Syracuse to the south and Carthage's garrisons to the west, the Mamertines sought protection first from Carthage and then, when Carthaginian aid proved too heavy a hand, from Rome. It was a fateful plea. The Roman Senate hesitated. Sicily lay beyond the Italian mainland, and intervention risked war with a formidable maritime power. Yet popular assemblies favored action. The Roman people, stirred by the promise of glory and spoils, voted to intervene. In 264 BCE, Roman legions crossed the Strait of Messina for the first time. To Carthage, this was a provocation, a trespass into its sphere of influence. Carthaginian forces occupied parts of the island, claiming to defend their allies and their trade routes. Neither power could back down without losing prestige. The underlying tensions ran deeper than the crisis at Messana. Rome and Carthage represented contrasting civilizations. Rome was an agrarian republic expanding outward by conquest and colonization. Carthage, a commercial empire built upon trade, tribute, and the labor of mercenaries. One valued citizenship and military discipline, the other, commerce and maritime skill. Where Rome's legions embodied civic duty, Carthage's forces were hired, a patchwork of nationalities bound by pay, not patriotism. Each system carried strengths and weaknesses that would soon be tested. Even before war broke out, both powers had glimpsed each other's potential. In 279 BCE, when Pyrrhus of Epirus invaded Italy and threatened Rome, Carthage offered ships and aid to the Romans, a pragmatic alliance against a common enemy. But Pyrrhus' eventual defeat removed the need for cooperation. As the two emerged stronger, they eyed each other warily across the sea. Carthage had reason to feel secure. Its navy, some 300 quinquiremes strong, was the finest in the world, its sailors seasoned by generations of maritime war. Its wealth bought the loyalty of mercenaries across Africa and Iberia. Its fortified harbors and high walls were legendary. Rome, by contrast, possessed no fleet, no experience at sea, and little understanding of naval warfare. Yet Rome's history had already shown that it learned swiftly, and once committed, never relented. By the spring of 264 BCE, the first Roman legions had landed in Sicily under the consul Appius Claudius Caudex. They found themselves facing not just Carthaginian garrisons, but a clash of empires, one driven by mercantile strategy, the other by republican ambition. The confrontation at Messana marked a turning point in ancient history. For the first time, Rome extended its reach beyond the Italian peninsula. The Mediterranean, once divided by commercial routes and cultural boundaries, would now become an arena for total war. Neither Rome nor Carthage understood the scale of what was beginning. Each believed the conflict would be short, confined to Sicily. Yet the stakes were far greater. The control of Sicily meant control of the grain supply that fed armies and cities alike. Whoever commanded the island would dominate the western Mediterranean. For Carthage, losing Sicily would threaten its trade and its allies. For Rome, victory promised access to maritime power and the wealth of overseas provinces. The stage was set. Two republics, one by land, one by sea, were about to fight for supremacy. The war that followed would last 23 years, spanning continents and generations. When it began, Carthage seemed unassailable and Rome untested. When it ended, the world would have changed forever. The Mediterranean's quiet waters, once routes of traders and colonists, were about to echo with the clash of oars and the cries of battle. The First Punic War was at hand, a struggle that would redefine the balance of power and mark the beginning of Rome's dominion over the seas. When the First Punic War began in 264 BCE, neither Rome nor Carthage could have foreseen that it would drag on for 23 exhausting years and reshape the Mediterranean world. What began as a local dispute over the Sicilian city of Messana quickly expanded into a continental struggle between two superpowers, the rising Republic of Rome and the ancient maritime empire of Carthage. It was a conflict born not only of ambition but also of misunderstanding, pride, and the inability of either side to yield. At the start, Rome had the advantage on land, while Carthage ruled the sea. The Carthaginian navy was the most formidable maritime force of its age. Its quinqueremes, five-tiered warships manned by experienced sailors and rowers, had long dominated the western Mediterranean. Rome, in contrast, was a land power. Its legions had crushed every rival across the Italian peninsula, but its fleet consisted of only a handful of transport vessels. The Roman Republic had never waged war on such a scale beyond its shores. When Roman legions first crossed into Sicily, they confronted not only Carthaginian soldiers, but also the island's complex politics. Some cities, like Syracuse under King Hiero II, sought to play both sides to preserve their independence. Initially, Hiero allied with Carthage, but after early Roman successes in 263 BCE, he switched allegiance. This decision would prove critical. His supplies and local support enabled Rome to secure its position in eastern Sicily, giving the Republic its first stable foothold on the island. Still, Carthage would not yield. Its commanders, among them Hanno and Hamilcar, fortified the western strongholds of Agrigentum and Lilybaeum. In 262 BCE, Rome laid siege to Agrigentum, a key Carthaginian base. The siege dragged on for months, draining both sides of men and morale. When a Carthaginian relief army arrived, the Romans faced their first major test against the disciplined North African and Iberian mercenaries in Carthaginian pay. After a bloody confrontation, Rome prevailed. Agrigentum fell, and for the first time, Roman soldiers stood victorious on Carthaginian-held soil. But victory brought a new realization. Sicily could not be conquered by land alone. Carthage's strength lay in its ability to ferry reinforcements and supplies across the sea. Rome, if it wished to win, needed a navy. In an astonishing display of determination, the Romans built one from nothing. According to Polybius, they captured a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme and used it as a model. Within 60 days, they constructed a fleet of more than 100 ships. Yet even with ships, Rome's inexperience at sea was glaring. To offset this, they introduced an innovation that would change naval warfare: the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge fitted with a spike that could be dropped onto an enemy ship, locking the two vessels together. This device turned sea battles into land battles, where Roman discipline could prevail. The experiment was first tested at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. The Roman consul Gaius Duilius commanded the new fleet against a Carthaginian squadron. The result stunned the ancient world. Using the corvus, Roman marines boarded enemy ships and fought hand-to-hand. The Carthaginians, unprepared for such tactics, lost 50 vessels. For the first time, Rome defeated Carthage at sea. Duilius celebrated a naval triumph in Rome, the first in its history, and the Roman people, unused to maritime victories, erected a column decorated with the prows of captured ships. Encouraged by success, Rome pressed further. In 256 BCE, the Senate approved a bold plan to invade North Africa itself and strike Carthage directly. A massive fleet of over 300 warships carried around 26,000 soldiers under the command of consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso. They clashed with the Carthaginian navy at Cape Ecnomus, off the southern coast of Sicily. The battle was one of the largest naval engagements in antiquity, involving nearly 700 ships and over 200,000 men. Despite Carthage's superior seamanship, Rome's numbers and determination carried the day. The Carthaginian fleet was shattered, and the path to Africa lay open. Once ashore, Regulus achieved early success. He captured Tunis and threatened Carthage itself. The Carthaginian government, desperate, sued for peace, but Regulus demanded humiliating terms: the surrender of the fleet, the payment of a massive indemnity, and the loss of all African territories except the city itself. The Carthaginians refused. Instead, they reorganized their army under a new commander, Xanthippus, a Spartan mercenary general who brought with him the disciplined tactics of Greek warfare. In 255 BCE, near Tunis, the Carthaginian army met Regulus in battle. Using his cavalry and elephants to devastating effect, Xanthippus annihilated the Roman force. Regulus was captured, and only a handful of survivors escaped. The invasion had failed spectacularly. The Roman fleet sent to retrieve the remnants of the army was caught in a storm off Camarina, losing hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of men. What had begun as triumph ended in catastrophe. The years that followed were marked by exhaustion and stalemate. Both sides rebuilt their fleets repeatedly, only to see them destroyed by storms or combat. In 253 BCE, another Roman fleet was lost to bad weather near Palinurus. The seas themselves seemed to conspire against the war. In Sicily, the conflict devolved into a brutal struggle for fortified cities, one siege after another, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, father of the future Hannibal, emerged as one of the war's most capable commanders. From his base at Mount Eryx, he waged a relentless guerrilla campaign, striking Roman positions and fading back into the hills. By 249 BCE, Rome faced severe strain. Its finances were depleted, its manpower stretched thin. That year, at the naval battle of Drepana, the Carthaginian admiral Hannibal inflicted one of Rome's worst defeats. Using superior maneuverability, he destroyed or captured nearly all of the Roman fleet. The consul Publius Claudius Pulcher, who had ignored bad omens before the battle, famously throwing the sacred chickens overboard when they refused to eat, was disgraced. Yet even in adversity, Rome refused to yield. Over the next decade, both powers endured a war of attrition. The population of Sicily suffered the most. Its cities pillaged, its fields burned, its people conscripted or enslaved. Rome continued to send legions. Carthage continued to rely on mercenaries. The cost was immense. By the mid-240s BCE, both sides were financially exhausted. But in Rome, a group of wealthy citizens, many from the senatorial class, took the extraordinary step of privately funding a new fleet. The Republic, determined to end the war, built 200 warships modeled on captured Carthaginian designs, but lighter and faster. The corvus was abandoned. Roman crews had finally gained the skill to fight at sea without it. The final confrontation came in 241 BCE off the Aegates Islands, west of Sicily. The Carthaginian fleet, commanded by Hanno the Great, attempted to resupply Hamilcar's forces on the island. But their ships were loaded with supplies and undermanned, while the Roman fleet under Gaius Lutatius Catulus was well prepared. On March 10, 241 BCE, the two fleets met in a decisive engagement. The lighter, faster Roman ships rammed and boarded their heavier opponents, inflicting a devastating defeat. 50 Carthaginian ships were sunk, 70 captured. The remainder fled. Cut off from resupply, Hannibal Barca could no longer continue the war. Carthage sued for peace. The resulting treaty marked the end of Carthage's dominance in the western Mediterranean. It agreed to evacuate Sicily, pay an indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years, and release all Roman prisoners without ransom. Rome, for the first time, acquired territory beyond the Italian mainland. Sicily became its first province, governed by a praetor and taxed directly for the benefit of the Republic. The First Punic War had lasted nearly a generation. It had cost Carthage its fleet, its treasury, and its prestige. For Rome, victory came at a terrible price. Hundreds of ships lost, hundreds of thousands of men dead, but it emerged stronger than ever. The experience had transformed it from a regional power into a maritime empire. The Senate learned that control of the sea was essential to control of the Mediterranean. Shipyards along the Tiber grew busier. The Roman navy became a permanent institution. Yet the peace was uneasy. Carthage remained a wealthy city, its trade resilient, its merchants undaunted. Though weakened, it still held its territories in Africa and much of Iberia. Its ruling families, especially the Barcid clan, burned with resentment. For Rome, the victory brought confidence and suspicion. The Republic soon annexed Sardinia and Corsica, exploiting Carthage's temporary weakness, a move that violated the spirit of the peace treaty. In doing so, it planted the seeds of future enmity. The First Punic War had revealed much about the character of both powers. Rome's strength lay in its endurance, its ability to adapt, and its refusal to surrender, no matter the cost. Carthage's power lay in its wealth and experience, but it was vulnerable to internal divisions and the limits of a system built on hired soldiers. When the war ended in 241 BCE, the Mediterranean was a changed world. The once unquestioned naval supremacy of Carthage had been broken. Rome's legions now gazed across the sea with confidence. But the peace that followed was not a conclusion. It was an interlude. Beneath the ashes of Sicily, resentment smoldered. The Barcid family, veterans of the war, would turn to Spain to rebuild their fortunes. From that new frontier would arise the man who would lead Carthage's revenge, a boy who had once sworn eternal hatred of Rome. By the year 218 BCE, the uneasy peace between Rome and Carthage finally collapsed into a storm destined to reshape the Mediterranean world. The Carthaginians, still wounded by their defeat in the First Punic War, sought to reclaim lost honor and power. At the center of this renewed struggle stood one of history's most remarkable figures, Hannibal Barca. The Second Punic War would span 17 relentless years, from 218 to 201 BCE, and test the endurance, strategy, and willpower of both empires. The origins of the conflict reached back decades earlier. After 241 BCE, Carthage had turned its gaze to Spain, establishing a new base of strength far from Roman interference. Under Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had commanded in Sicily, a systematic conquest began, bringing rich silver mines and tribal alliances under Carthaginian control. Upon Hamilcar's death around 229 BCE, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair expanded the dominion further, founding the city of Carthago Nova, modern Cartagena. But his assassination in 221 BC brought young Hannibal, then only in his mid-20s, to command. Ancient accounts, notably from Livy and Polybius, describe Hannibal's upbringing steeped in vengeance. His father had reportedly made him swear an oath before the Carthaginian gods never to be a friend to Rome. Whether literal or symbolic, that promise defined his destiny. By 219 BCE, Hannibal besieged Saguntum, a Roman allied city south of the Ebro River in Spain. Despite repeated Roman protests, Carthage offered no recall. The city fell after an 8-month siege. Rome, citing a breach of treaty, demanded Hannibal's surrender. When Carthage refused, war was declared in 218 BCE. Hannibal's response was bold beyond precedent. Instead of awaiting Roman invasion, he embarked on an overland campaign from Spain to Italy, an expedition that would defy geography and expectation alike. With roughly 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and nearly 40 war elephants, he crossed the Ebro River, subdued hostile tribes, and made for the Pyrenees. After brutal attrition through mountain passes and the Rhone River crossings, he reached the Alps by late autumn of 218 BC. Polybius, who retraced his route a century later, described the journey's horrors: freezing winds, avalanches, ambushes, and starvation. Of the vast army that had begun in Iberia, barely 26,000 survived the crossing into the Po Valley. Yet Hannibal's arrival in northern Italy struck terror into Rome. His first encounter came at the Battle of the Ticinus River, late 218 BCE, where his cavalry routed Roman forces led by Publius Cornelius Scipio, who was wounded in the fray. Soon after, Hannibal crushed another Roman army at the Battle of the Trebia River, December 218 BCE, using ambush tactics that exploited Roman rigidity. The following year, 217 BCE, he maneuvered through the Apennines into Etruria and struck again at Lake Trasimene. There, under thick morning fog, Hannibal trapped the army of Gaius Flaminius against the lakeshore and annihilated it. Nearly 15,000 Romans were killed, one of the largest ambushes in military history. Rome, in shock, appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus as dictator. His approach was cautious and deliberate, avoiding pitched battles, earning him the nickname Cunctator, the delayer. Fabius shadowed Hannibal's movements across Italy, denying him supplies and allies. Yet, Roman impatience with Fabian tactics soon reasserted itself. By 216 BCE, Rome raised an enormous army, over 80,000 men, determined to crush Hannibal in open battle. The confrontation took place near the town of Cannae, in Apulia, on August 2, 216 BCE. The Battle of Cannae became an enduring lesson in military strategy. Facing a superior Roman force, Hannibal arranged his troops in a concave formation, a subtle crescent designed to envelop the enemy. As the Romans pressed forward, the Carthaginian line bent inward, while cavalry on both wings struck from behind. By afternoon, the Roman army was encircled, trapped in a tightening ring of death. Nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers were slain, consuls, senators, and nobles among them. The historian Livy called it a slaughter unequaled in Roman memory. The aftermath was catastrophic for Rome. Allies defected across southern Italy. Capua, Tarentum, and much of Samnium opened their gates to Hannibal. Macedon under Philip V even allied with Carthage, hoping to gain an advantage in Greece. Yet Hannibal, lacking reinforcements from Carthage, could not deliver a decisive blow to Rome itself. Carthaginian politics, divided between factions, refused to send substantial aid. Rome, meanwhile, refused to surrender. The Senate forbade mourning for the dead and raised new legions from freedmen, slaves, and boys barely of age. In 215 to 212 BCE, Hannibal roamed the Italian south, winning smaller victories but losing momentum. Rome adapted its strategy, cutting Carthaginian supply lines and striking in other theaters. In 211 BCE, Rome retook Capua, executing its leaders. In Spain, Roman commanders Publius and Gnaeus Scipio were killed in 211 BCE, but their relative Publius Cornelius Scipio, later Africanus, took command in 210 BCE, capturing Carthago Nova in 209 BCE. This brilliant stroke shifted the war's momentum. By 207 BCE, Rome's strategic endurance began to prevail. Hannibal's brother, Hannibal Barca, bringing reinforcements from Spain, was intercepted at the Metaurus River in northern Italy and killed. His severed head was thrown into Hannibal's camp, a grim message that his hopes of reinforcement were over. In 204 BCE, Scipio Africanus proposed an audacious counter-invasion of North Africa. The Senate hesitated, but public support carried the decision. Landing near Utica in 204 BCE, Scipio allied with Numidian princes, notably Massinissa, whose cavalry expertise would prove decisive. Carthage recalled Hannibal from Italy in 203 BCE, ending his 17-year campaign. The final confrontation occurred near Zama in October 202 BCE. Hannibal commanded about 40,000 troops and 80 war elephants. Scipio fielded a similar number, but with superior cavalry. The elephants' charge was broken by Roman tactics. Corridors opened in the infantry ranks, and the beasts were harassed into panic. When Massinissa's cavalry routed Carthage's horsemen and struck from behind, Hannibal's army was trapped. The once invincible general suffered his first and only decisive defeat. The peace of 201 BCE ended the Second Punic War. Carthage was stripped of its empire outside Africa, forbidden to wage war without Roman permission, and forced to pay 10,000 talents of silver over 50 years. Its fleet was reduced to a mere handful of ships. Rome emerged as the unchallenged master of the Western Mediterranean. The Second Punic War revealed the extremes of human endurance and the precision of strategic genius. Hannibal's campaigns became the model for generations of commanders, studied by Napoleon, Clausewitz, and Patton. Yet his brilliance could not overcome the political divisions of Carthage or the relentless resilience of Rome. As the war ended in 201 BCE, Hannibal entered Carthage not as a conqueror, but as a statesman tasked with restoring the city's finances under Roman scrutiny. The struggle that began with Saguntum and crossed the Alps had cost hundreds of thousands of lives and changed the balance of power forever. The Mediterranean was now, undeniably, a Roman sea, Mare Nostrum. But in victory, Rome's memory of fear would not fade. The Carthaginian name itself became a symbol of dread, and that enduring hatred would one day lead to an even darker reckoning. When the Second Punic War ended in 201 BCE, the Mediterranean entered a fragile peace, a silence that seemed to promise stability but instead concealed the seeds of annihilation. Carthage, stripped of her empire and pride, turned inward. Rome, by contrast, stood transformed, a republic hardened by victory and now a global power in everything but name. The war had proven Rome's capacity for endurance, but it had also planted in the Roman heart an unhealed scar, the memory of Hannibal. Though the general had long since left Italy, his name continued to echo through the Senate halls as a warning of what could rise again from the ashes of Carthage. The Treaty of 201 BCE, dictated by Rome, left Carthage with no overseas territories, no right to wage war without Roman approval, and an annual indemnity payment of 200 talents for 50 years, a crushing economic burden. Yet under these terms, Carthage began to recover quietly and efficiently. The city's commercial genius reawakened. Trade across the Mediterranean revived. Agriculture flourished again on the North African plains. Within a generation, Carthage regained prosperity, though under strict Roman watch. Ironically, peace made her rich once more, and that prosperity rekindled Roman suspicion. In the years following the war, Hannibal Barca, now in his late 40s, took on a new role as Suffete, or chief magistrate, of Carthage around 196 BC. Far from seeking revenge, he restructured the Carthaginian state, reforming taxation, purging corruption, and rebuilding the economy to ensure the massive indemnities could be paid on time. Livy and Appian both record how he increased the treasury's revenues without burdening the common people, an administrative brilliance equal to his military genius. But success drew envy. Political rivals, eager to curry Roman favor, accused Hannibal of plotting a new war. In 195 BCE, Rome received allegations that Hannibal was in contact with Antiochus III, the Seleucid king, then preparing for conflict in Greece. Whether true or not, the Roman Senate demanded his arrest. Knowing resistance would invite invasion, Hannibal fled his homeland. He found refuge first in Tyre, then in the court of Antiochus III in Asia Minor. When Antiochus himself fell to Roman power after 190 BCE, Hannibal fled again, moving between eastern courts, Bithynia, Crete, and others. Always hunted, always restless. Around 183 BCE, cornered by Roman envoys in Bithynia, he took poison rather than surrender. According to tradition, his final words were a defiant echo to Rome. "Let us relieve the Romans of their fears, since they find it long to wait for the death of an old man." With Hannibal's death, the living embodiment of Carthaginian resistance vanished. Yet Rome's fear did not fade. The Roman Republic had begun to expand relentlessly eastward, conquering Macedon, Greece, and much of Asia Minor. But her gaze often turned back west, toward North Africa. Many senators could not forget how near Rome had come to destruction at Cannae. Among them rose a voice that would define the next generation: Marcus Porcius Cato, remembered as Cato the Elder. Cato had served as a young soldier during the closing years of the Second Punic War and never forgave Carthage's earlier dominance. When he was sent as an envoy to Africa around 153 BCE to mediate a dispute between Carthage and Numidia, he was astonished to find the city vibrant and wealthy again. Its ports were busy, its markets alive with trade. Returning to Rome, he held up a ripe fig in the Senate, declaring it had been plucked only 3 days' sail away from Carthage. His message was clear: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. But before that destruction came, another power played a pivotal role: Numidia. The Numidians, Rome's former allies in the Second Punic War, were now ruled by King Massinissa, who had fought alongside Scipio Africanus at Zama. Massinissa, granted vast territories by Rome, sought to expand his kingdom at Carthage's expense. Beginning around 182 BCE, he repeatedly encroached on Carthaginian lands, exploiting their inability to respond militarily under the terms of the peace treaty. Each Roman arbitration favored Massinissa, further humiliating Carthage. Carthage appealed to Rome for relief, but the Senate's responses were slow and duplicitous. When Carthage finally took up arms against Numidia without Roman approval around 151 BCE, the act provided Rome with a long-awaited pretext. The Senate declared that the treaty had been broken. Rome, feigning outrage, began preparations for war. It was not an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of decades of strategic patience. Meanwhile, within Carthage, public desperation mounted. The merchant elite, long hesitant to challenge Rome, were swept aside by a surge of nationalist anger. Leaders such as Hasdrubal the Bothar called for open resistance, vowing that submission now meant certain death. Carthage began a frantic rearmament, secretly producing weapons, ships, and siege engines. The city's citizens and slaves labored day and night. Women cut their hair to make ropes for catapults. In 149 BCE, the Roman Senate formally declared war, the Third Punic War. The expedition was led initially by consuls Manius Manilius and Lucius Marcius Censorinus, commanding an invasion force of about 80,000 men. Yet Rome's demand before the attack was extraordinary. They ordered Carthage to surrender all weapons, war machines, and hostages. The Carthaginians complied. Thousands of suits of armor and catapults were delivered to the Roman camp. But then Rome revealed the final demand. The population of Carthage must abandon the city and resettle at least 10 miles inland. It was a demand not of submission, but of extinction. Polybius, who was present with the Roman army as a historian, recorded the stunned reaction. The Carthaginian envoys returned home in tears. The city's council erupted in defiance. The people resolved to fight. The Third Punic War had begun, not as a contest of empires, but as a siege for survival. Before the armies even clashed, Rome faced internal debate. Many Roman nobles doubted the morality of the war. Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, expressed misgivings about the cruelty of Rome's policy, but accepted command when appointed later in the conflict. As the Roman fleet landed near Utica in 149 BCE, Carthage, surrounded by walls stretching over 30 kilometers, prepared for siege. The city's defenses were formidable, 3 lines of walls, each over 30 feet high, with towers, battlements, and a massive harbor complex. Despite the exhaustion of years of sanctions, Carthage's population, nearly 500,000 people, resolved to resist. The city became a furnace of defiance. The first Roman assaults in 149 and 148 BCE faltered. Disease, poor logistics, and the skill of Carthaginian engineers frustrated every attempt to breach the walls. Carthaginian commanders like Hasdrubal led sorties that inflicted heavy casualties. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Carthage might hold out indefinitely. By 147 BCE, however, the Roman Senate recalled its failed generals and granted full command to Scipio Aemilianus. His discipline and methodical organization soon changed the course of the war. He tightened the siege, cut off the city's supply routes, and fortified his positions. The blockade starved Carthage into submission, reducing its once proud citizens to famine and desperation. While the city endured the tightening noose, the wider world looked on in resignation. The Punic Wars had raged, with intervals of uneasy peace, for more than a century, from 264 BCE to the present moment in 147 BCE. Rome had learned, adapted, and conquered, while Carthage, despite her brilliance, had remained the vanquished. Now, the end approached, not as the close of a war, but as the erasure of a civilization. By the summer of 216 BCE, the Second Punic War had entered its most decisive phase. 2 years had passed since Hannibal's daring march across the Alps and his early victories at Trebia and Lake Trasimene. Rome, stunned but unbroken, now prepared to deliver a crushing response. In the fields of southern Italy, near a small Apulian town called Cannae, the largest Roman army ever assembled would face the greatest tactical mind of the ancient world. It would become a slaughter so vast, so complete, that it would haunt military thought for over 2,000 years. After his triumph at Lake Trasimene, 217 BCE, Hannibal had moved freely across central Italy. His goal was not to destroy Rome outright, a near impossibility without siege equipment, but to break her alliances. The Roman Republic's power lay not only in its legions, but in the network of allied cities that provided men, supplies, and strategic depth. If Hannibal could convince them that Rome could not protect them, he might unravel the Republic from within. To achieve this, he needed one more overwhelming victory, a blow that would shatter Roman morale and prestige. Meanwhile, in Rome, panic had given way to grim resolve. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus as dictator, granting him extraordinary powers. His cautious strategy earned him the nickname Cunctator, the delayer. Fabius refused to meet Hannibal in open battle, instead harassing his foraging parties and avoiding decisive engagements. The approach infuriated the Roman people, who saw it as cowardice, but it preserved Rome's strength. Hannibal's army, though brilliant in battle, depended on plunder to feed itself deep in enemy territory. Fabius's shadow war frustrated his plans and strained his resources. When Fabius's term ended, the Roman Senate, desperate for a quick victory, abandoned his strategy. In 216 BCE, two new consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, took command of a massive army, 8 legions and an equal number of allied troops, numbering around 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Never before had Rome fielded such a force. The consuls divided command on alternate days, and their relationship, marked by political tension, would prove disastrous. Hannibal, encamped near Cannae along the Aufidus River, deliberately chose the battlefield. The open plain favored his superior cavalry, while the dusty wind and narrow formation space could disrupt the larger Roman army. Polybius and Livy describe how Hannibal carefully positioned his troops, a crescent formation with his weakest units, mainly Gauls and Spaniards, in the center and his elite African infantry on the flanks. His cavalry, led by Hasdrubal and Maharbal, occupied both wings. On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BCE, the two armies deployed under a rising sun that blew dust into Roman faces. When the battle began, the Carthaginian center slowly yielded under the Roman advance. Believing victory near, the Roman legions pressed forward, tightening their formation as they pushed the enemy back. But this was Hannibal's trap. As the center retreated, the African infantry on both flanks wheeled inward like the closing jaws of a beast. Simultaneously, Hannibal's cavalry routed the Roman horsemen on the wings and struck from behind. By midday, the Roman army was surrounded. The mass of soldiers, pressed together in heat and dust, could neither maneuver nor fight effectively. The slaughter that followed was almost beyond comprehension. Polybius estimates over 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed, consuls, senators, and officers among them. Livy adds that 10,000 more were captured, and only a few thousand managed to escape. Hannibal lost perhaps 6,000 men, mostly in his center. It was not merely a victory, it was annihilation. The Republic had never suffered a blow of such magnitude. Entire consular armies had been destroyed before, but never on this scale, never with such precision. The names of the fallen read like a roll of Rome's nobility. As news reached the city, Livy recounts how despair gripped the streets. The Senate ordered temples opened, prayers offered, and mourning curtailed, not because grief was unnecessary, but because there were not enough families left untouched to mourn privately. After Cannae, many believed Rome would finally sue for peace. Maharbal, Hannibal's cavalry commander, urged an immediate march on the capital, saying, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use it." But Hannibal refused. His army, though triumphant, was exhausted and lacked the siege equipment needed to breach Rome's formidable walls. Instead, he sought to consolidate his position by persuading Rome's allies to defect. The results were mixed. Some southern cities, such as Capua, the second largest in Italy, opened their gates to him. Tarentum and parts of Lucania also revolted. The powerful kingdom of Macedon, under Philip V, allied with Hannibal, beginning the First Macedonian War, 215 to 205 BC, against Rome. Yet most of Rome's allies, the Etruscans, Latins, and Umbrians, remained loyal, a testament to the strength of Roman political organization. Rome, stunned but resolute, began to rebuild. The Senate refused even to discuss peace. They passed emergency measures to raise new armies, recruiting boys barely of age and even purchasing slaves to serve as soldiers. Despite the ruin at Cannae, the Republic's political structure held firm. The Senate maintained unity, The magistrates cooperated, and replacements were swiftly appointed for the fallen. Meanwhile, Hannibal established winter quarters in Capua, where his soldiers rested after years of campaigning. Yet time, once his ally, began to turn against him. Carthage, distracted by politics and corruption at home, failed to send substantial reinforcements. Hanno and other conservative factions in the Carthaginian Senate opposed supporting Hannibal's independent campaign. The war had become his personal crusade, admired but not adequately supplied. In 215 BCE, Rome reorganized under new consuls and adopted Fabius Maximus's strategy once more, avoiding pitched battles, cutting off Hannibal's supply lines, and reclaiming lost allies through diplomacy and pressure. Slowly, Rome began to strangle Hannibal's gains. That same year, a new front opened in Sicily, where Hieronymus of Syracuse, successor to the Roman ally Hieronymus II, defected to Carthage. However, the Roman general Marcus Claudius Marcellus besieged and captured Syracuse in 212 BCE after a prolonged campaign. The famous mathematician Archimedes, who had designed the city's defenses, was killed when Roman soldiers stormed the walls. With the fall of Syracuse, Rome secured control of Sicily once more, eliminating a crucial Carthaginian foothold. Back in Italy, Hannibal's situation deteriorated further. His attempts to relieve pressure on his allies stretched his forces thin, though he continued to win smaller engagements. At Herdonia, 212 BCE, and Tarentum, 212 BCE, none matched the scale or impact of Cannae. Each victory brought diminishing returns. Rome's capacity to absorb defeat and keep fighting defied every precedent in ancient warfare. In 211 BCE, Hannibal marched toward Rome itself, perhaps hoping to force the Senate to recall its armies from southern Italy. The move caused panic. The city prepared for siege, citizens armed themselves, and the Senate met continuously. But Hannibal, unable to sustain a long siege, withdrew after demonstrating his reach. The act, though bold, underscored his isolation. The war had reached a stalemate. Hannibal was dominant in southern Italy, but strategically trapped. The aftermath of Cannae reshaped Roman military thinking forever. The Republic learned that survival depended not only on valor, but on patience and logistics. Commanders such as Fabius and Marcellus perfected the art of attrition, while Rome's naval dominance ensured steady supplies and reinforcements. Hannibal's tactical genius remained unmatched, but his inability to translate victory into political collapse became the turning point of the war. By 212 BCE, the momentum had shifted subtly but decisively. Rome's resilience, her inexhaustible manpower, and the unity of her allies stood in stark contrast to Carthage's indecision and distance. Hannibal still roamed Italy unbeaten, yet his dream of breaking Rome's coalition faded with every passing year. His army, once the terror of the Republic, became a force of survival, brilliant in defense, tragic in purpose. The shadow of Cannae lingered, not only as a memory of Rome's greatest defeat, but as the crucible that forged her future empire. In its ashes, Rome found a grim revelation that no single disaster could destroy her, and that endurance itself could be a weapon greater than genius. The war was far from over. In the West, new leaders would soon emerge, men who had grown up under the shadow of Hannibal and who would carry the fight back across the seas. Among them, one name would soon rise above all others: Publius Cornelius Scipio, a man who would avenge Cannae and end the Carthaginian dream forever. The Italian campaign of Hannibal Barca stands as one of the most audacious and studied military operations in history. From 218 BCE until his recall in 203 BCE, Hannibal waged a relentless war across the Italian peninsula, shaking the very foundations of the Roman Republic. His strategy blended boldness with psychological mastery, exploiting the Roman obsession with honor and open battle. Though ultimately ending in strategic failure, Hannibal's campaign remains one of antiquity's most extraordinary demonstrations of tactical brilliance. Following his triumph at Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal appeared unstoppable. The Romans, devastated by the loss of some 50,000 men, faced an existential crisis. Many of Rome's allies began to waver. In the south, Capua, the second largest city of Italy, defected to Hannibal. Greek cities in southern Italy, including Tarentum and parts of Bruttium and Lucania, followed. Syracuse in Sicily switched allegiance, and Philip V of Macedon concluded an alliance with Carthage in 215 BCE, initiating the First Macedonian War. Yet, despite the seismic impact of these defections, Hannibal's strategy began to face structural challenges. The Carthaginian general's plan depended on shattering Rome's network of alliances that bound the Italian Confederation. He believed that Rome's dominion rested on coercion and fear, and that repeated military humiliation would cause its subject peoples to revolt. But Hannibal misjudged the durability of Roman political unity. Despite their catastrophic defeats, Rome's Latin and Central Italian allies remained steadfast. The Senate, led by unflinching figures like Quintus Fabius Maximus and later Marcus Claudius Marcellus, refused to negotiate or yield. They declared that Rome would never ransom prisoners, would not bury the dead of Cannae until victory, and would raise yet another army to continue the fight. Fabius, whose cautious delaying strategy had once been ridiculed, now became the moral anchor of Roman persistence. His approach, harassing Hannibal's foraging parties, avoiding pitched battle, and destroying supplies, slowly eroded Carthaginian strength. Rome reorganized its military, expanded conscription, and began fortifying key cities to deny Hannibal open confrontations. The war transitioned into one of attrition, and Hannibal, without reinforcements from Carthage, found himself increasingly isolated in the Italian heartland. The years following Cannae illustrate the slow grind of Roman recovery. In 215 BCE, Hannibal wintered in Capua, where he was joined by new allies but also confronted the first signs of strategic stagnation. His forces, though still formidable, lacked siege equipment and could not storm Rome's heavily fortified capital. His army was sustained through requisition and local support, but the further he advanced, the more he relied on unreliable allies. Rome, meanwhile, systematically targeted defecting cities. In 211 BCE, after a lengthy siege, Capua fell back under Roman control. The Roman commanders Fulvius Flaccus and Appius Claudius punished the city severely, executing its leaders, enslaving much of its population, and erasing its political autonomy. The destruction of Capua sent a message to all wavering allies. Rome's vengeance would be absolute. In Sicily, the defection of Syracuse brought a new front to the war. From 214 to 212 BCE, the Romans besieged the city, which was defended by both Carthaginian reinforcements and the engineering genius of Archimedes. Polybius and later historians recount how Archimedes' inventions, giant catapults, grappling cranes, and possibly concave mirrors, kept the Roman fleet at bay for months. But in 212 BCE, the Romans finally breached the city's defenses, sacking Syracuse and killing Archimedes in the chaos. The fall of Syracuse restored Roman dominance in Sicily and provided a critical logistical base for further campaigns. Meanwhile, Hannibal continued to maneuver across southern Italy. In 212 BCE, he captured Tarentum through a daring nocturnal assault, yet the Romans maintained control of the citadel overlooking the harbor. Despite these localized successes, Hannibal was unable to deliver another decisive blow. His forces, stretched thin and deprived of consistent support from Carthage, began to dwindle. In Iberia, the Scipio brothers, Gnaeus and Publius Cornelius Scipio, fought to sever Carthage's supply lines, achieving key victories before both fell in battle in 211 BCE. Yet their efforts laid the groundwork for the emergence of Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, the man who would ultimately turn the tide. By 209 BCE, Scipio Africanus was appointed commander in Iberia. His campaign combined audacity and innovation equal to Hannibal's. In a lightning assault, he captured the Carthaginian capital of New Carthage, modern Cartagena, securing a strategic harbor, silver mines, and hostages that ensured the loyalty of local tribes. Over the next 4 years, Scipio dismantled Carthage's Iberian presence through decisive victories at Becula, 208 BCE, and Ilipa, 206 BC. With Iberia secured, Scipio turned his eyes toward Africa. Back in Italy, Hannibal's position continued to deteriorate. His brother Hannibal Barca, after consolidating remnants of Carthaginian forces in Iberia, attempted to reinforce him by marching across the Alps in 207 BCE. It was a daring repetition of his brother's earlier feat, but the Romans, having learned from experience, intercepted him near the Metaurus River. In the ensuing Battle of the Metaurus, Hasdrubal was decisively defeated and killed. His head was sent to Hannibal's camp and thrown before his lines, a macabre message that Carthage's cause in Italy was lost. From this point, Hannibal's war became a defensive struggle for survival. The years from 206 to 203 BCE were marked by Roman consolidation and Carthaginian decline. Hannibal remained undefeated in direct engagements, yet strategically impotent. He could no longer advance northward nor hold the loyalty of all his Italian allies. Rome, meanwhile, was preparing for the final act of the conflict. Scipio, now a celebrated general, proposed to carry the war directly into Africa. Despite senatorial hesitation, he secured command and began assembling his forces in Sicily, launching the invasion in 204 BCE. Hannibal, still in southern Italy, faced a choice between continuing a hopeless resistance and defending his homeland. When Roman forces under Scipio began ravaging the Carthaginian countryside, the Senate in Carthage finally recalled Hannibal. After 15 years in Italy, the man who had haunted the Roman Republic embarked for Africa in 203 BC. His army, though still disciplined and loyal, was a shadow of its former strength. The Italian campaign had achieved the impossible in many respects. It had exposed Rome's vulnerabilities, devastated its manpower, and altered its military doctrines forever. Yet, without reinforcement and political unity, Hannibal's victories could not translate into strategic success. Rome, adapting through relentless resilience, transformed defeat into endurance. The stage was now set for the final confrontation between two civilizations, one fighting for vengeance, the other for survival. As Hannibal's ships sailed from Bruttium's shores toward Carthage, he carried with him not only the remnants of his army, but also the fading hopes of a Mediterranean empire. The struggle that had begun in 218 BCE would reach its climactic resolution in Africa, where the destiny of Carthage and Rome would be decided once and for all. The recall of Hannibal Barca to Africa in 203 BC marked the beginning of the last act of the Second Punic War. After 15 years of relentless campaigning across Italy, he returned to a homeland transformed by defeat, internal division, and Roman invasion. The balance of power had shifted. Carthage, once the undisputed maritime empire of the Western Mediterranean, now stood on the defensive. Rome, hardened by years of bloodshed, had evolved into a machine of endurance and adaptability. The final confrontation between Hannibal and Publius Cornelius Scipio would decide not only the fate of Carthage, but also the geopolitical destiny of the ancient world. When Scipio Africanus landed in North Africa in 204 BCE, his initial strategy reflected both audacity and prudence. Rather than rush into confrontation with the Carthaginian army, he aimed to dismantle its support structure piece by piece. His forces, numbering about 30,000 men, established a fortified camp near Utica. He sought alliances with local Numidian leaders who had long been entangled in Carthage's sphere of influence. Among these rulers was Massinissa, a brilliant and ambitious prince who would soon play a decisive role in the war. At the time, Numidia was divided between Massinissa, who had aligned himself with Rome, and Syphax, who remained loyal to Carthage. The Romans understood that Numidian cavalry could tip the balance of power. Their mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and fierce independence made them invaluable. In 203 BCE, Scipio capitalized on this dynamic, forging a deep alliance with Massinissa through both diplomacy and shared ambition. Together, they began to erode Carthaginian influence across North Africa. Carthage, alarmed by Scipio's success, sought to counter through negotiation and force. They sent envoys to Rome, offering to end the war under terms that preserved their autonomy. The Roman Senate, cautious but resolute, refused anything short of total submission. Meanwhile, Scipio's forces conducted devastating raids, burning fields, destroying supply depots, and destabilizing local loyalties. The Carthaginian army, under the command of Hasdrubal Gisco and Syphax, attempted to encircle Scipio's camp at Utica. But Scipio, employing a ruse reminiscent of his tactical mastery in Iberia, launched a surprise nocturnal assault. In a meticulously coordinated operation, his troops set fire to the enemy encampments, causing panic and disarray. Both Hasdrubal and Syphax were forced to flee, and their armies were annihilated in the confusion. By 203 BCE, Carthage was in crisis. Its armies in the field had been shattered, and Roman forces were closing in. It was at this juncture that Hannibal was recalled from Italy. His return was not triumphant, but necessary. The Senate of Carthage, desperate for salvation, believed that only Hannibal could restore balance. Polybius records that upon arriving at Hadramedum, Hannibal wept as he walked the shores of his homeland, aware that the war's center of gravity had shifted irreversibly. Hannibal began rebuilding his forces with characteristic rigor. Though Carthage could no longer field the veteran troops that had once crossed the Alps, he gathered a new army composed of African levies, Carthaginian citizens, mercenaries, and a few surviving veterans from Italy. He also reinforced his cavalry with the remaining Numidian contingents still loyal to Carthage. Despite the odds, Hannibal's leadership re-energized the Carthaginian cause. He sought to draw Scipio into battle under conditions favorable to his tactics, a contest of maneuver, timing, and deception. Scipio, however, was equally deliberate. He understood that Hannibal's genius lay in his ability to manipulate Roman aggression. Thus, Scipio prepared his forces with rigorous discipline, training them to resist panic and to fight with flexibility. His army, including the legions that had fought in Iberia, was seasoned, adaptable, and motivated by a deep sense of purpose. Massinissa's cavalry, now fully committed to Rome's cause, provided the decisive edge that Scipio needed. Negotiations were attempted before the final confrontation. Hannibal, perhaps seeking to preserve what remained of Carthage, met Scipio in person near Zama. According to Livy, the two generals held a calm and dignified conversation, recognizing in each other the embodiment of their civilization's strength and honor. Hannibal proposed peace based on the status quo ante bellum. Rome would withdraw, and Carthage would retain its African territories. Scipio, guided by Roman Senate policy, rejected any compromise that left Carthage capable of waging war again. The meeting ended without resolution. Both men knew that the coming battle would decide the fate of nations. In 202 BCE, near the town of Zama Regia, the two greatest commanders of their age met on the field of battle. Hannibal's army, numbering about 50,000, included 80 war elephants, a mix of infantry from Carthage, Libya, and mercenary contingents, and a cavalry force diminished by the loss of Numidian allies. Scipio's army was smaller but more cohesive, around 35,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, including Massinissa's elite riders. The battle opened with Hannibal deploying his elephants to break the Roman lines. Yet Scipio had prepared for this. He arranged his legions in open columns, creating corridors through which the elephants could be funneled and neutralized. Trumpets blared, and Roman soldiers banged their shields, spooking many of the animals into panic. Some turned back, trampling Carthaginian infantry in confusion. The initial assault faltered. Hannibal then advanced his first 2 lines of infantry, composed of mercenaries and African levies. The fighting was fierce and methodical. Scipio maintained the discipline of his legions, absorbing the attack and gradually pushing forward. As the front ranks of both armies became entangled, Hannibal held back his elite veterans, men who had fought in Italy for over a decade. When they entered the fray, the tide briefly turned. Their experience and cohesion drove deep into the Roman lines, creating a moment of peril for Scipio. But the Roman commander anticipated this phase. He restructured his formations mid-battle, reinforcing his center while signaling Massinissa and his cavalry to complete a sweeping maneuver. The Numidian horsemen, alongside Roman cavalry under Laelius, routed the Carthaginian riders and then circled back to attack Hannibal's army from the rear. The encirclement was devastating. Caught between Roman infantry and cavalry, Hannibal's forces began to collapse. The slaughter was immense. Livy records that over 20,000 Carthaginians were killed and as many captured. Hannibal's own escape was narrow. Realizing the battle was lost, he withdrew with a handful of loyal companions toward Hadramedum. The Battle of Zama ended the Second Punic War. Carthage, utterly broken, sued for peace. Scipio, now hailed as Africanus, dictated harsh but calculated terms. Carthage was stripped of its fleet, forbidden to wage war without Rome's consent, and forced to pay an enormous indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years. Numidia, under Massinissa, became Rome's ally and a regional power in its own right. The consequences were profound. Carthage, though not destroyed, ceased to be an independent military power. Its empire was dismantled, and its future depended on Roman tolerance. The Roman Republic, through endurance and adaptation, had emerged as the unchallenged hegemon of the Western Mediterranean. Hannibal, ever the patriot, accepted the peace but refused humiliation. In the years that followed, he served as a statesman in Carthage, implementing reforms to stabilize its economy and governance. Yet Rome, still wary of his influence, demanded his surrender. Around 195 BCE, he fled into voluntary exile, finding refuge at the courts of Eastern kings such as Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. Even in exile, he remained a symbol of resistance to Roman expansion. When cornered by Roman agents in Bithynia around 183 BCE, Hannibal took poison, declaring that he would not live to see the triumph of his enemies. The end of the Second Punic War in 201 BC marked a transformation in world history. Rome's victory secured its supremacy and paved the way for further conquests in the eastern Mediterranean. Carthage, confined and dependent, entered a period of uneasy peace, one that would last 50 years before Rome's appetite for domination rekindled the fires of war once more. Half a century after the Second Punic War, the specter of Carthage lingered in the Roman imagination. Though stripped of its fleet and forbidden to wage war without Roman permission, the city had rebuilt itself into a prosperous trading hub, thriving on commerce, agriculture, and banking. By 149 BCE, Carthage's recovery, wealth, and strategic location on the North African coast had reignited Rome's fears. The Republic, now the uncontested master of the Western Mediterranean, viewed the existence of a strong, independent Carthage as an intolerable threat. The seeds of the Third Punic War were sown not merely in military considerations but in politics, economics, and a deep, institutionalized Roman paranoia. Rome had grown increasingly concerned about Carthage's handling of its border disputes with the neighboring Numidian kingdom, now ruled by Massinissa, a longtime Roman ally. Massinissa had been systematically encroaching on Carthaginian territory, seizing farmland and disrupting trade routes. When Carthage, acting in self-defense, confronted these incursions, Rome seized the opportunity to justify intervention. The Senate, spurred by influential senators such as Cato the Elder, demanded action. Cato had famously ended every speech in the Senate with the phrase, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed. By 149 BCE, this sentiment had hardened into policy. The Roman declaration of war in 149 BCE was as much ideological as it was practical. Rome claimed that Carthage had violated the terms of the treaty established after the Second Punic War by defending itself against Numidian raids. Whether this was true or merely a pretext is debated by historians, but it provided the legal and moral justification Rome needed. The Senate authorized a full-scale military campaign, assigning Consul Manius Manilius and, later, other commanders to oversee the operation. The war that followed was not simply a battle between armies. It was a deliberate campaign to obliterate a city and erase its civilization. Roman legions, numbering approximately 80,000, landed on the African coast near Carthage. The city's defenses were formidable. Its walls, rebuilt after the Second Punic War, stood as a testament to Carthaginian resilience. According to Polybius, the walls were more than 30 feet high and reinforced with towers at regular intervals. Carthage's population, estimated at over 200,000 including civilians and soldiers, prepared for a siege unlike any they had faced before. Women and children took part in the defense, turning homes and temples into improvised fortresses. The city became a citadel of desperation. The Romans began by encircling Carthage, constructing fortifications to prevent supplies or reinforcements from reaching the city. Over the next 3 years, from 149 to 146 BCE, the siege evolved into a grueling war of attrition. The defenders mounted sorties to disrupt Roman operations, but each attack came at a heavy cost. According to Appian, Carthage melted its own gold and silver to forge weapons, illustrating the extreme measures its citizens took in the face of annihilation. Roman engineers, in turn, applied relentless pressure, building siege towers, ramps, and battering engines to breach the walls. The struggle was not merely military, but also psychological. Romans employed terror as a weapon. Entire neighborhoods were burned, and captives were executed or enslaved to demoralize the population. Carthaginian resistance, however, was tenacious. Every breach was met with fierce counterattacks. Civilians joined the fight, turning rooftops, narrow streets, and marketplaces into killing grounds. Polybius describes a city transformed into a maze of barricades, traps, and improvised artillery, where every citizen became both soldier and victim. Despite this extraordinary resistance, Rome's superior organization and resources gradually wore down Carthage. Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, took command in 147 BCE. He combined patience, engineering skill, and relentless assault strategies. Rather than launching a single frontal attack, he methodically reduced Carthage's outlying defenses, cutting off supplies and isolating sectors of the city. His approach exemplified the evolution of Roman military doctrine, a combination of tactical acumen, logistical superiority, and psychological warfare. By 146 BCE, the city's fate was sealed. Roman legions finally breached the walls after a sustained assault. Fighting became a brutal, block-by-block struggle. The streets ran with blood as Romans methodically cleared the city. Carthaginian defenders, exhausted but resolute, inflicted heavy casualties on the attackers, Yet each counterattack only delayed the inevitable. Civilians, armed with whatever tools they could find, joined the defense, making the conquest a total war against both soldiers and citizens. The final days of Carthage were apocalyptic. Appian recounts that the city burned for days, temples and homes consumed by fire, smoke rising over the Mediterranean as a grim signal of Rome's triumph. Resistance continued until the last defenders were either killed or captured. According to ancient accounts, roughly 50,000 Carthaginians were enslaved, a tragic testament to the scale of the destruction. The city itself was systematically razed. Its harbor was filled, fields plowed with salt, and every vestige of urban life obliterated. Carthage ceased to exist as a political, economic, or military entity. The fall of Carthage was not merely a military victory. It was a profound statement of Roman power. Rome had demonstrated its capacity to annihilate a major city, eradicate its population, and control an entire region without leaving an independent rival. The destruction resonated across the Mediterranean, sending a clear warning to other states that resistance to Rome would be met with total extermination. Economically, strategically, and psychologically, the obliteration of Carthage marked the final establishment of Rome as the uncontested hegemon of the Western Mediterranean. Yet, even in destruction, Carthage's legacy endured. Its culture, commerce, and maritime expertise had influenced the region for centuries. Roman writers and historians, including Polybius and Appian, documented its achievements alongside its failures. Carthage's resistance, tactical ingenuity, and ability to recover from previous wars became a source of both admiration and caution for Rome. The city's annihilation served as a grim lesson in the costs of empire and the consequences of provoking a rising power. The Third Punic War also shaped Roman policy for centuries. The obliteration of Carthage became a precedent for dealing with potential rivals. Rome's willingness to wage total war against a defeated yet resilient state illustrated a new form of imperial strategy, the complete and irreversible destruction of enemies who might one day challenge Roman dominance. It was a policy of deterrence as much as conquest, ensuring that the Western Mediterranean would remain firmly under Roman control. From a human perspective, the siege and fall of Carthage highlight the catastrophic impact of war on civilian populations. Polybius and later historians emphasize that ordinary people, women, children, and the elderly, bore the brunt of Roman vengeance. Entire generations were lost, cultural institutions destroyed, and economic networks dismantled. The destruction of Carthage stands as one of the most vivid examples of ancient urban warfare and its capacity to erase a civilization. With the city reduced to ashes, Roman forces secured the surrounding region of Africa. Masiniss's Numidian kingdom expanded under Roman patronage, consolidating Roman influence and creating a buffer state to prevent future Carthaginian resurgence. Rome established new colonies, implemented administrative control, and monitored trade to ensure that no independent power could rise in the Western Mediterranean. The fall of Carthage thus had immediate and long-term geopolitical consequences, solidifying Rome's dominance and reshaping the regional balance of power for centuries to come. The fall of Carthage in 146 BC marked not only the destruction of a city, but the end of an era in the Mediterranean world. After nearly a century of conflict, from the First Punic War in 264 BCE to the Third Punic War, Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Yet the consequences of the Punic Wars extended far beyond territorial conquest. They reshaped political, economic, and cultural landscapes and left lessons for generations to come. The ashes of Carthage became both a literal and symbolic marker of Rome's power, a reminder of the costs of resistance, and a prelude to Rome's eventual expansion across the entire Mediterranean basin. In the immediate aftermath of Carthage's destruction, Roman forces completed a systematic and deliberate campaign to erase every vestige of the city. Polybius records that the Romans burned temples, demolished public buildings, and razed houses. Fields that had once fed a prosperous population were plowed and cursed, the harbor was filled, and any fortifications were dismantled. It was a campaign designed not merely to conquer, but to obliterate. Estimates suggest that approximately 50,000 survivors were enslaved, dispersed across the Roman world to serve as laborers, while many of the city's elites were executed. Carthage, which had once commanded vast territories in North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain, ceased to exist as a political entity. Yet the memory of Carthage persisted in the Roman imagination. The destruction of such a powerful city left a permanent impression on Roman culture, law, and foreign policy. Roman senators, generals, and citizens alike recalled the resilience and audacity of Carthage, particularly the genius of Hannibal. Polybius and later historians like Livy documented these events not only as history, but as moral lessons. Hannibal himself, despite exile and eventual death in 183 BCE, became a symbol of daring, strategic brilliance, and the costs of loyalty to one's homeland. Roman youths were taught his campaigns as cautionary tales of what could happen if an enemy was underestimated. Rome's consolidation of power after the Punic Wars had profound implications for its internal structure. The enormous influx of wealth from Carthage's destroyed holdings and tribute from defeated allies enriched the Republic. Roman aristocrats and senators profited from both the spoils of war and the economic domination of the Western Mediterranean trade networks. This new wealth, however, also exacerbated social inequalities. The expansion of large estates, worked by enslaved Carthaginians and other conquered peoples, displaced small farmers, contributing to the social tensions that would later shape Roman political struggles. The geopolitical consequences were equally significant. With Carthage eliminated, Rome faced no rival capable of challenging its authority in the Western Mediterranean. Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and the former territories of Carthage were brought under Roman control or influence. Numidia, once a patchwork of independent kingdoms, became a Roman-aligned buffer state under Massinissa, further securing Rome's dominance. The Republic had transformed from a primarily Italian power into a Mediterranean empire, capable of projecting force across vast distances and managing complex political alliances. Rome's naval supremacy, first asserted in the First Punic War, and perfected through these conflicts, became the foundation for its future campaigns in Greece, the Eastern Mediterranean, and beyond. The human cost of the Punic Wars, particularly the Third, was staggering. Centuries of chroniclers emphasized that the devastation was not limited to armies but extended to civilians, infrastructure, and culture. Families were uprooted, cities destroyed, and trade networks disrupted. Carthage's obliteration, while complete, served as a warning to other powers, such as the Hellenistic kingdoms, about the consequences of resisting Roman expansion. This policy of total war became a recurring theme in Roman military doctrine, shaping campaigns against later foes like Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and eventually Gaul and Britain. Culturally, the Carthaginian legacy persisted subtly despite the physical destruction of their city. Knowledge of Carthage's maritime technology, trade practices, and agricultural methods survived through Roman observation and adaptation. The Republic incorporated elements of Carthaginian commerce into its economic systems, and scholars studied Carthaginian engineering, particularly harbors and fortifications, to inform Roman projects. Even Roman literature reflected a fascination with Carthage. Livy, Polybius, Appian, and later historians detailed Carthaginian courage, ingenuity, and ruthlessness, framing it within the narrative of Rome's moral and military superiority. The fall of Carthage also marked a turning point in Rome's military evolution. The Punic Wars, particularly Hannibal's Italian campaign, forced Rome to adapt its legions to new forms of warfare. The development of flexible formations, strategic patience, and the integration of allied cavalry were lessons drawn from the trials of facing Carthage. By the end of the Third Punic War, Roman military organization had matured into a system capable of confronting diverse enemies across different terrains, from the African plains to the mountainous regions of the Hellenistic world. Symbolically, the destruction of Carthage represented the end of an era in which multiple powers competed for dominance in the Mediterranean. From 264 to 146 BCE, the Punic Wars had consumed hundreds of thousands of lives and reshaped political boundaries. With Carthage gone, Rome faced no equal in the Western Mediterranean and set the stage for its expansion into the Eastern Mediterranean, including Greece, Macedonia, and the Hellenistic kingdoms of Asia Minor and Egypt. The Mediterranean, once a sea of competing empires, had been transformed into a Roman lake, a mare nostrum, centuries before the term would be coined. Yet the legacy of Carthage lingered as a cautionary tale. Roman leaders remembered that even a destroyed city could leave a lasting impression on history. Hannibal's campaigns, especially the victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, remained central to military education for centuries. Roman generals studied his tactics meticulously, learning the value of strategic mobility, psychological warfare, and the careful timing of engagements. Even centuries later, military thinkers like Vegetius and later European strategists drew lessons from the Punic Wars, underscoring the enduring impact of the Carthaginian challenge. Politically, Rome's experience with Carthage influenced its approach to governance in conquered territories. The Republic began to formalize mechanisms for provincial administration, taxation, and military oversight. Carthage's destruction highlighted the need to control rebellious regions proactively, leading to policies that integrated local elites into Roman governance while suppressing potential sources of insurrection. This balance of coercion and assimilation became a hallmark of Roman imperial policy. The Punic Wars also reshaped Roman identity. The conflicts fostered a sense of collective resilience, duty, and determination. Surviving the terror of Hannibal's campaign and emerging victorious in Africa instilled a narrative of Roman exceptionalism. The Republic had faced annihilation and yet endured, absorbing lessons, adapting strategy, and ultimately imposing its will across the Western Mediterranean. Carthage's destruction, while tragic for its inhabitants, reinforced Rome's self-perception as a civilization destined for dominion. In memory and historiography, Carthage became a symbol of both resistance and warning. Its audacious generals, disciplined citizens, and ability to repeatedly challenge Rome earned admiration even from its conquerors. Hannibal's name became synonymous with strategic brilliance. The city itself, a reminder that wealth, skill, and ambition alone could not withstand Rome's enduring power. Polybius, Livy, and later Appian chronicled Carthage's rise and fall not merely as a tale of military events, but as a moral and political study, exploring the consequences of ambition, resilience, and the ultimate cost of defiance. By the end of the 2nd century BCE, the Mediterranean world had been irrevocably altered. Rome's supremacy was unchallenged. The Western Mediterranean was integrated under its control, and the path to empire was clear. The destruction of Carthage was both a culmination of Rome's century-long rivalry with a pure power and a prelude to the Republic's transformation into a Mediterranean empire. It demonstrated the lengths to which Rome would go to secure its dominance and provided a stark lesson on the intersection of power, politics, and survival in the ancient world. From the first clash over Sicily to the final flames consuming Carthage in 146 BCE, the Punic Wars were more than a series of battles. They were a testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and endurance, and a reminder of the costs of empire. Hundreds of thousands of lives were lost, cities were razed, and entire generations were shaped by conflict. Rome emerged as the unchallenged power of the Western Mediterranean, its political and military structures strengthened by the trials of a century-long struggle. Carthage, once a beacon of trade, innovation, and strategy, was erased from the map, living on only in memory and the lessons it left behind. The Punic Wars remain a story of ambition, rivalry, and survival, posing an enduring question: what must a civilization destroy and endure to dominate the world?